Let's assume you're implementing drag and drop on your website. Then it becomes important to you to know which mouse button was clicked when the user tried to drag an item so that you can react appropriately. I'm going to open Visual Studio Code again and start with a clean slate. I'll make a file called whichbutton.html, and this will have just a single div. I'll add some CSS to it to make it recognizable. And I'll add some JavaScript. I'm not going to write any code right now for any of these handlers. What I intend to do is, as I move the mouse over the element, the div in this case, I'll write to the console which button was pressed while the mouse is being moved. First of all, this event object that's received, in the case of a mouse down, it's of type mouse down event. This specific event class doesn't add any properties to its base class. So there are no custom properties that I can look at this event. I am after which properties are there in the class or the prototype that this event comes from. And this event comes from a mouse event. So it's best to look at this class. If you look at this class, there's a property called button. And this reads the button number that was pressed, if applicable, when the mouse event was fired. But this is not a reliable property. You can test it as I will. So let's use this property and say just console.log. I'll say the button that was pressed was event.button. And this is supposed to produce a numeric value, each either a 0, 1 or 2 depending on which button was pressed. So it's going to produce 0 if the main button was pressed, 1 if the right hand side button or the auxiliary button was pressed, 2 if the middle button, I don't know. Anyway, auxiliary button is the middle button, 2 if the right hand button, and so on and so forth. So let's put it to use and see if this is actually what it does. So as I move the mouse on the button, I should get a reading in the console, either a 0 or a 1 or a 2. Now to give you a visual aid, a visual feedback as to which button I'm pressing, in the mouse down I'm going to change the cursor to something else. If I press a mouse button, I'm going to change it to something else. Otherwise you wouldn't know. I wouldn't know that I pressed a button, you wouldn't know that I pressed it. So if I press a button in the mouse down, I'll just change the cursor to something else. Let me run this example and show you. Okay, here's the running example. I'll do an F12 to bring up the console. I'll clear the console. Okay, it says div is not defined. Sorry about that. Here's the console. As I move my mouse over this, I will first not click any button and it should display the value. Let's see what value it displays. It says the button is 0 and I'm moving the mouse, and as you will see, the counter on the right side keeps going up as I move the mouse because there are those many events firing as I move the mouse. Now I'm going to click the left mouse button and move the mouse, and I still see the button value 0 as the number of events increase. This means this is not reliable. It doesn't tell you any difference between the uninitialized state and the left mouse main button. Let's look at the documentation. Does it warn us about that? It says yes. It very obliquely states main button pressed, usually the left button, or sometimes even the uninitialized state. So this really should be highlighted, or this should be in red somewhere, saying this is a completely unreliable event, guys. The 0 value represents 2 different states, the uninitialized state and the other state. If I press the right button, I should get a value of 2. That should be fine. So I'll press the right button this time and start moving. Oh, I press the right mouse button. I've pressed the right mouse button and I'm moving it. The event count is increasing, but the button value still is 0. That's interesting. So this property is completely unreliable, button property. The other property is called which, but at the very beginning, and rightly so, in red it warns you. It says this feature is not standard, and it's not on the standards track. Don't use it in production on any sites facing the web. So, and that's what it should have done even for the button property. So let's anyway use the which property and see if it is any better than this one. And this also should tell you, it tells you 0 for no button, 1 for left button, and so on. So I'll just change this to which and see if this tells me anything at all. And this time if I move the mouse, I'm not clicking anything yet. As you can see, the mouse cursor is the default one, and I get the value 1. What does the documentation say? You get 1 if the left mouse button is pressed. Haha, I haven't pressed a damn thing. I'm just moving the mouse without clicking any buttons. Now let me press the left button and the cursor has changed and I still get the value 1. So this too is ambiguous, has ambiguous states. It's not reliable. So don't use this. Then which one to use? The only reliable event that I conclude various hours of research is this property called buttons. This is a flags attribute, means it's a binary value. It has 0 for no button. If you don't press anything, it has the value 0. If you press the left or the primary button as you've configured it, it has the value 1. If you press the right mouse button, it'll have the value 0 plus 2. If you press both the left and right buttons, it'll have the value 0 plus 1 plus 2. That's 3. If you press only the middle button, it'll have the value 4. But if you press the right button and the middle button, it'll have the values 2 plus 4, 6. You know, like the bitwise fields, it adds up the values. It bitwise ORs the values. And so the way to test whether a certain button has been pressed will be to test whether that number exists, the bits of the number you're after exists in the resultant value. So if the button we are testing is, say, the secondary button, whether the user click the right button or not, you will have to bitwise AND the value 2 with the resultant buttons value that comes from the event object. So you'll have to do, or let me say, left mouse button pressed will be event dot buttons. This will be the bitwise value. If I AND it, bitwise AND, I'm not doing a logical AND, I'm doing a bitwise AND with the left value of the left button is 1. Then usually when you bitwise AND something with a value like 1, it gives you the same value back. That it gives you 1. Let me illustrate that with these slides. If you have the number 7 and if you bitwise AND it with the value 1, that's the binary of 7 and that's the binary of 1. When you AND these, you get back a 1. If you AND the value 7 with a 2, you get back a 2. And you AND the value 7 with a 4, you get back a 4. Because 7 is 1 plus 2 plus 4. So if I AND it with 1, I should get back 1. The right mouse button has the value 2, I think. Yes. So if I AND the value 2, if I get back 2, then we can say that the right mouse button has been clicked. and then the middle button has the value 4. It says auxiliary button, which is the mouse wheel button, or the middle button has the value 4. And then the fourth button, typically the browser back button and browser forward. I don't know what these buttons are. Maybe the rich people have. I don't have a mouse that has these buttons. Maybe those rich people have buttons like that. Mouses that have buttons like that. I've seen some mouses that have buttons on the side. I think this is what it is referring to. But I'm not going to bother about these. I'm not one of those rich people. So anyway. And when I mouse up, let me change back the cursor to the default cursor. Otherwise, we are misled to believing that the mouse is still being a mouse button is still being held. In fact, let me rewrite this condition. I'll say if yes, sorry, the messages I'm getting is because of the operator precedence. So you need to take care of operator precedence. I forgot to mention that. Otherwise, this is evaluated first and then it is ANDed with this, because this operator, equality operator, identity equality operator, has greater precedence than bitwise AND operator. So if I do this, that should work now. Now I don't press a button, so I see no mouse button pressed. I press the left button, I'll see left mouse button pressed. I'll leave it. I'll press the right one and I see the right mouse button pressed. I'll press both left and right this time and I see left and right. I'll leave them. I'll press the middle button and I see the middle button message. So you see, this is the most accurate way of doing this.